Hey kids, welcome to Unit 3, Lesson 8, More Array Algorithms, exercise number 1. We have a what do you think this program does? Let's take a look at the code. We're instantiating a new object, my file reader. It is of the file reader class. It is passing one parameter, numbers.txt. That looks an awful lot like that file. We're creating an array data. It's using our instantiated object myFileReader, and it looks like it's calling the getIntData method and passing 4. We're once again using our object myFileReader, and it's calling the printValues method and passing data. Let's take a look at our class FileReader. We have three things we're importing. We have our old friend scanner. But I think we're going to be using scanner a little different than you've been in previous lessons. We have an import java.io.file. We haven't seen that either. We can do a little reading about it though. If we go over to documentation, and if we click this here, we can learn a little more about what we're importing. Here's java.io and file. This is saying the file class in Java is a representation of a file or directory path name. And if you look at our example, it's saying the file name is the name of the file. A very simple way to put this is the code just to link to our file. So we can look through some sort of either text or Excel sheet. Java.io file not found exception. This one, a little more nuanced, kids. This is a common exception that occurs while we try to access a file. File not found exception is thrown by constructors. It occurs at runtime, so it is a checked exception. We can handle this with Java code. That means there's some code probably down here that deals with any errors with trying to use text files. Let's take a look at the rest of the code. We're creating our class. We're creating two variables. This one is of the scanner class. We have file reader, and then of the file class, my file. So those classes we're importing here, looks like we're passing it down as our data type. We have one constructor, file reader. It's taking one parameter file name. We have our set file method down here. And it looks like we're creating two new things. My file, which looks like it's a file object passing along file name, and then file reader, which is of our scanner class, which is getting my file passed along. We are creating our scanner here, and then we have this file not found exception error. I think this is the piece of code that deals with exceptions we get when we try to use text files. Spoiler alert here, kids, at the end of the lesson, I'm going to really show what this really does. We have a method here. It's called getIntData. It is creating a new array of values, and it is getting num values passed. Down here, we have a for loop looking through values, and num values getting passed here was just a number 4. So that means we're only looping through 4 things in this loop. We have an if statement, FileReader.hasNextInt. That's our friend the scanner class. Understand this piece of code. Let's go back and look at the documentation for the scanner class. And if you come down here, we can see hasNextInt is a Boolean statement, so it's a true or false. And this method is to determine if the next input is going to be an integer or not. That means it'll return true, move on, if not false, and probably not loop through anymore. What I think this piece of code is doing is looking through this numbers.txt, and if it's a number, it's going to add it to our array. If not, I think we're going to turn a false or close reading the file. Finally, we have our print method here. This is looping through our values, and then it's printing off each of the values that we created from our previous method here and giving it a little space. Let's look at numbers.txt. For numbers, I bet you that deals with the for we're passing along as well. Let's go back to my console. And what do I think this program does? We are creating an array, and it is for long. We're getting those numbers from the numbers text file right here. Then we're looping through and checking to make sure they're actual numbers, and then printing them off. I think we're going to get 8, 12, 1, and 6 to print off. Well, let's see if I'm right, kids. 8, 12, 1, and 6 with that little space that we saw in our print statement. So this did exactly what I thought. Let's really understand this program though, kids. If you hit remix, we can play around with this. First thing, let's understand this for. If you go to numbers and just add any number you want, go back here and run, you're going to see it doesn't print off. If I increase that to 6, you'll see those numbers will print off. Let's take a look at what this has next int does. Let's say if my next file is roads by accident, and then we go back to regular numbers. We're at 8. We have to increase to 8. I think it's going to print off all the way to my name, and then we're not going to get anything after that, or null. Let's try. Yep, that looks like it would happen. We can test it. Let's take off roads. Run it again. That last number, there was nothing there, so it just returned a 0 because it again was null. That's what that does. Let's take a minute and talk about this file not found exception error. We briefly touched on this before. Essentially, if our program isn't pointed towards the right file, we're going to get an error. How are we going to know that? And that's what this file not found exception error is. And we're not going to dive into this too much. You'll notice there is these keywords try and catch. Those actually are not part of the AP CSA exam, so we're not going to take a lot of time to delve into them. What we are going to do is talk about what we need to understand for the exam. You need to know this block of code needs to be in any program that you're running that includes some sort of text file, or we're pointing towards an outside file we need to read. If for some reason you spell the name wrong or the file has read-write access, we want to know that and we want to get an error. And this is what the file not found exception does. What you see it's doing down here is it's getting information from that text file. If it gets that error saying, hey, there isn't something right, we want to print off file not found. Otherwise, we just want to keep going. Think of this block of code as just error checking code. Again, you do not have to understand try or catch for the AP exam. You do have to understand file not found exception though. Key takeaways from this lesson, kids, is diving into a little more how we use our algorithms. In this exercise, we used a couple of import statements we haven't used before, the java.io file and the file not found exception. Both of these are used when we want to use a text file in Java, so keep that in mind. We also used a scanner class a little different than we've used previously. Instead of having a user input a number, we were just having our numbers inputted by the actual text file, which is pretty neat. And this demonstrates the power of computer science as well. We're using a text file to look through some information to filter it. This time, we filtered just to check if they were numbers. And I'm sure as we go through this lesson, we're going to learn other ways to filter our information. Just one last note, don't forget about this null point exception that happens when we try to use text files in Java. How do we get around that? We use a little bit of code because it's a runtime error. Hopefully this video helped you understand a little more about array algorithms and how we can use them a little differently. As always, if you have any questions, come see me. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next video. See you later, kids. Bye. Bye.